Welcome everyone, my name is Mr. Chris, and welcome to Battlefield 3. Now today I want to talk about single player violence. Now I've kind of touched on video game violence before, but I was talking about how people view video game violence and how they supposedly think it affects people as well. But today I actually want to talk about the video game violence and how it should be used as opposed to the way it is used at the moment. Now some games get it right. Some games put the right amount of violence in for the game to be entertaining but not boring. Whereas there are a lot of games which seem to think that we're all a bunch of mindless, brain-dead people who just want to kill shit constantly. I don't really understand that. If you play certain games, I've got a few examples here as well. You're playing the game and you kind of want to enjoy the story and the cutscenes, but the annoying thing is that whenever a cutscene ends, you're thrown into just a situation where you got to kill like 150 fucking people. It's just enemy after enemy after enemy after enemy after enemy, and it gets really annoying. And I find that a lot of games do this too much. I'm not sure whether it's just because the developers are scared of kind of deviating from this formula. But the thing is, the formula doesn't work. That's the biggest issue with it. Unless you're completely brain dead, it's not enjoyable to kill that many people over and over again. Because AI, and AI generally in most games are pretty stupid. And because of that, it's just not entertaining in any way. It can be, depends on what the game is. But for the most part, it's not that entertaining. I mean, if you want to, if like games want to have you just, just take out a bunch of people like over and over and over again, let's just make a multiplayer game, because that's kind of what they're for. And multiplayer games are more fun because enemy players are real people, so they can react to the way you play, you can react to the way they play, and that's why multiplayer games are so successful. But the problem with doing that in a single player game is that there's just AI everywhere, and AI for the most part are pretty damn stupid. There's been games that have done them really well, but in your generic shooter, that's what you get, is pretty damn dumb AI, and it's really annoying. You can't really fight against it. And here's a few examples of games in which the single player campaigns have just had enemy waves just thrown at you constantly, mindlessly as well. And that's Battlefield 3, Call of Duty, and Dead Space 3. They're just three examples. There's loads of others, but I haven't played all of them. Now Call of Duty, it does it in a way that you have your cutscene or whatever you want, the cutscene, someone talking to you over a radio, whatever the case may be, and then once that's done, you're thrown into a situation where you just got to run, kill, and about 8 you guys are dead by the end of the mission. And then you go into a new cutscene, and then you get a new mission where you got to kill like another 100 people, and that's really annoying. Now Battlefield 3 did this to an extent which it was even worse. I mean, if any of you remember that mission where you're standing on the overpass, and if you don't go to that checkpoint behind you, you will be standing there for hours, well, just forever actually, just shooting enemies. And it's not like the enemies are kind of moving up tactically, like move forward, get into cover, shoot from cover, maybe chuck a grenade, use a rocket launcher to destroy the overpass. No, they're just running at you just constantly. They don't even think about what they're doing. Obviously the AI is not supposed to think, but they don't do anything. They don't react to what you're doing. They just kind of do it. And it doesn't really make any sense, because in real life that wouldn't happen, and Battlefield's supposed to be like it's not realistic, but it's supposed to be a little bit more realistic than other shooters, or than most other shooters. It's not like Arma 3 or anything like that, but they make out that they're going for like a bit of a more tactical shooter. So the fact that the AI are playing in that way doesn't really suit the game, and the whole campaign for Battlefield 3 just didn't entertain me in any way, because most of it was just like that. It's just like, here's a cutscene, here's some enemies, here's a cutscene, here's some enemies, here's a cutscene, here's some enemies, just over and over again. And it gets kind of annoying after about an hour or two of doing that. Now games that have used violence in a good way, and this is why I'm putting them in the video, just to give you a good example and describe to you how violence should be used. Games that have done that in the past, and like quite recently as well, like Last of Us. The Last of Us did it really well. Now the reason the violence in that was justified is because there wasn't that many enemies anyway. There were quite a lot, obviously, if you take the whole game into account. For the most part, they're not just spamming enemies at you. The enemies do stuff. I've just said do. They do stuff in the game, and obviously it's a survival story, and Joel's past kind of, he's been surviving in this world, so the violence is justified, and it's not dumb violence either. The AI do actually react to you in a very good way. They're not just like, oh, let's run at him, trying to kill you. They genuinely can kill you if they want to, and you really have to play well in order to not get killed, or at least that's what I've seen. I've never actually played the game. I watched it because I just couldn't really afford to buy it. And my friend did offer to borrow it, but I'd have to wait for one of my friends to borrow it, my other friend to borrow it, and then me. That's going to take like a month. So I decided to just watch a playthrough. But from what I saw and from the reviews and stuff, I could tell that this was a game in which the violence was justified. It wasn't just there, if that makes sense. Now, another game that did it quite well, in my opinion, was Red Dead Redemption. Now, the thing I thought about Red Dead is there are a lot of enemies in certain situations, which, you know, you could argue, oh, well, you just moaned about for free for doing that. Well, the thing is, in Red Dead, you're a cowboy, and that's, you know, throughout your past, you've been committing crimes in which you do that anyway, so it's not like you're not supposed, or don't feel bad about killing people. And then you've also got the aspect of a lot of the areas in which you encounter well, not hundreds of people, but when you encounter like 30 or 40 people, they're guarding something, and that was kind of a common theme, or at least Wild West common theme, sorry. There's always a leader and then lots of enemies and stuff like that, so it makes the violence seem okay, and not like, it doesn't take away from the experience, it actually adds to it in a lot of ways. So you don't feel like you're mindlessly just killing hundreds of, well, you never kill hundreds of people anyway, but you never feel like you're mindlessly just killing. You feel like it is genuinely helping the story, or at least it works with the story, is probably a better way of putting it. And that's what I want when it comes to single player violence. Excuse me. Now, other games that have done this quite well, I thought the original Dead Space did this really well as well. And the fact, I mentioned Dead Space 3 earlier. Now, the thing between Dead Space and Dead Space 3 is that Dead Space, it's very atmospheric. You're alone, your character doesn't talk. Even something as silly as your radio turning on can crap you up, because you can be walking through a hallway and it's really tense because you haven't seen an enemy for about 2 minutes. You know there's an enemy going to come, and then all of a sudden it's like, Isaac. It craps you up because you don't expect it. And Visceral Games did a very good job of the original Dead Space, because although there were a lot of enemies throughout the whole game, whenever an enemy jumped out at you, it was quite scary. It made you jump. There were enemies that I don't know if you played the game or not, but there were these enemies that you couldn't actually kill. You could only kill their limbs and then they'd regrow. And that was scary as anything. You're stuck in a room with like 2 of these things, and you're trying to get away, and you just can't until you figure out how to get out of there. You've got to keep shooting until this woman helps you out. And throughout that whole sequence, you were crapping your you're just absolutely crapping your pants, because you just don't know what to do, and it's very scary. And there's only 2 of them, whereas they could have easily just thrown like one of them in there and then just thrown enemy after enemy at you, which they kind of do. They have 2 and they throw like 5 or 6 enemies at you, but the 5 or 6 enemies are you can take them down. But then you've also got these 2 things coming after you, so you've got to think about how you got to kill these as quickly as possible, so that you can take the other enemy's limbs off very quickly, so that they can't kill you for another like 30 seconds or so. And it's really scary. It does actually make you very tense as you're playing the game. Whereas the thing that Dead Space 3 did, the first few levels when you're in space were very good at doing that. They made you still feel that tensity. Even when you're playing with a friend, you can still be jump scared, and you can still feel a little bit of tensity. Whereas when you get down to the planet, me and my friend Caramel, who we were playing with, we just felt like the enemies were just being thrown at us constantly. Just spam, 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 spam. And you might see a new enemy that you've never seen in the other Dead Space games, and you're like, oh, that's new, it's like a boss fight. Nope. 5 minutes later, you got 6 of those bastards on you. And it just felt like they lost track of what their game was good for. Their original game was a scary horror game, and then the second game was a scary horror game mixed with action elements and a good story. And then the third one just sort of started off as a horror game, and then kind of moved on to this action epic, which wasn't epic at all. It was just kind of just enemies being spammed at you constantly. It kind of become like Battlefield 3's campaign and Call of Duty's campaign. It was just boring and unimaginative, and that kind of got annoying. And you'll see that if you've been keeping up my playthrough. Me and Sam do plan on finishing that eventually. So you'll get to see that as the game progresses, all you get is just spamming of enemies, and it gets really annoying. So the thing is, I feel that games that are going to have violence in them just need to concentrate on the fact that we're not mindless people who just want to, we don't pick up a first-person shooter campaign just to kill a bunch of people. We pick it up because we want to enjoy the story, the characters, we want to be immersed in the environments, that sort of thing. That's what we look for in single-player shooters. I mean, there are probably people out there who do enjoy shooting up the AI constantly, but there is a point where it gets dull and boring, especially if that's what the whole premise of the game is, essentially. I want to see different gameplay mechanics, see different things occur, and that's kind of what makes a single player game good. Good story, good characters, good gameplay, because obviously it's a game, not a film. And yeah, that's kind of what I want to see. And all these games that have been coming out that are quite generic have just been showing us how good they are at spamming AI that don't know what they're doing at you constantly. And I find that quite annoying. I kind of wish that, you know, when I play a first-person shooter like Call of Duty, I'm doing a stealth mission. It may be only 6 enemies, but they're quite fearsome enemies. They're quite good at killing you, and you know they can kill you. So you actually have to think about what you're doing, or maybe have it into Battlefield 4 so that, you know, I mean, there's that ship sequence that we saw at E3. Make it interesting. Don't make it so we're just running through the ship killing a bunch of people, which is kind of what I saw. Make it so, you know, something more interesting happens. It's not a spamming of enemies, even if it means you've got to cut to a cutscene. There's nothing wrong with that. I feel like cutscenes in games are kind of, in some games they're overused, but in a good way, and some in a bad way. Whereas in a lot of games they don't really do that many cutscenes. And someone argued a while ago that cutscenes make a game. They don't, but they definitely help, especially with a game that focuses primarily on just killing people constantly. If you have cutscenes throughout the game, that can really break up the gameplay a little bit and add a lot of story elements. And when you leave the game, even though the gameplay was just you killing a bunch of people, it kind of makes it more interesting, and that's kind of what I want to see. A good example of that, actually, is probably Deus Ex: Human Revolution. Now, a lot of people hated on this game in some ways, and some people really liked it. I was one of the people who really liked it. The thing about Deus Ex was there was a lot of violence throughout the game, but it broke it up with stealth scenes where you know, sneak through layers of building or something like that, with a lot of enemies that you know for a fact can take you out. Ammo isn't scarce in that game, but at the same time you can be doing a mission for a long time, so ammo can become scarce. That makes it scary as well. You got to use your suit, or, you know, your augments in a very good way in order to actually get through levels. You got to think about levels and find, you know, ways of getting around a level a bit better. And it's a very open game, and then you've also got the cutscenes, which break up the gameplay a lot, because the gameplay doesn't seem repetitive, but it would get repetitive if there wasn't so many cutscenes. And the cutscenes do a very good job of breaking up the gameplay and adding lots of story elements. So Deus Ex is a really good game in terms of the way they use the gameplay, and there's a lot of violence in the gameplay, but they make it so that the violence isn't over excessive, and they use the cutscenes in an effective manner. And I feel that if Battlefield 4 can do that, and maybe even Call of Duty Ghosts can do that, then they'll start to be taken more seriously in terms of their single player side of the game. Because at the moment, people joke that, you know, Battlefield 4 just is a multiplayer game. There's no point in having a single player. And Call of Duty used to be a single player based game, but now it's a multiplayer based game. And if they really want to keep those single player campaigns and justify them, then what they need to do is make them more interesting, more enjoyable, more memorable. That's when they'll succeed. And that's kind of my thoughts and opinions on single player game violence and how it should be used. So that's pretty much all I've got to say. If you want to comment with your thoughts and opinions, go ahead and do that. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. I've been Mustafa. Over and out.